Life is full of ups and downs, it's full of things, but I want people just to say, hey, with the right directions, I can make my life worthwhile.
This podcast is proudly supported by the Ōtara Network Action Committee, ōNAC, community-owned, community-driven and community-led.
No mai, haere mai. Welcome back again to We Are Ōtara, the podcast. We are so proud to be at episode 50 of, I think that's unheard of in podcasting history, isn't it, Vin? Yeah. As you probably know, those of you who watch our series, that once you get to 20 podcasts, most series never get past that and you're in the top billion. So Finny, our podcast lead, has that little notch for his belt today, podcast number 50. So to celebrate today, it's my joy to welcome you to a man who I feel like I've known all my life. Not really all my life, but certainly for more than 30 years.
Oh, yes, easily.
And he just keeps on coming back into our life. So, and then last time we spoke, which was a really special occasion, the whakanoa for after Dad died, and you were talking about being at Bede's Intermediate, and I'm going, goodness me, Mark Beale, you need to be sitting in our podcast chair. So rather than me trying to introduce you, I'd like you to tell our watchers, our listeners, our people that watch the We Are Ōtara podcast a little bit about you, and then we'll dive into some questions.
Yeah. No, that's fine, yeah. I ended up at Bede's Intermediate because in those days when you were teaching, you were bonded for 3 years, and so you had no choice where you went. And so I was teaching at Glenfield Intermediate and then got sent to Ōtara Intermediate.
And you fell in love with Southside.
I did actually. It was a culture shock to begin with. I was appalled at the condition of the school. That my classroom, when I walked into it at the beginning of the school holidays before Christmas, was an absolute mess. It had holes in the walls, the desks were broken, the chairs were broken. It was awful. And I looked at it and I thought to myself, how can you teach children and give children a feeling of self-respect in a room like this? And so I spent the whole holidays doing the room up.
Yeah, that was before you got married.
No, I was married. My wife,
I've got a big surprise.
My wife went to teach at Bede's primary at the same time, so...
so you had 2 clean-up jobs to do?
Yeah. And so I made the room as attractive as I possibly could. And so I bought Hessian board, and where there were holes I made big notice boards out of Hessian and covered them all up. I painted bits of the classroom, nice bright purple, yellow, red, orange colours. Really
You'd be right at home here then. Yeah.
And then when the kids came, and the other thing I did is every child that was going to come in, I put their name up on a notice board with a piece underneath it so they could put their work or something that's special to them on it. So the first day they walked into the room, they saw their name, they could identify it, it was their room. And then I said to the kids, I said, look, the desks aren't really very good. Let's paint them. And I said, you can choose the colour, you can bring some paint along if you've got any, otherwise you tell me what colour and I'll go and get the paint. And so we painted all of the furniture in the classroom. And so we had red desks and yellow desks and purple desks with yellow legs. And I mean, typical Ōtara kids, it had to be colourful and had to be like Disneyland almost. And we painted the blackboard ledge and then we painted the form outside. And the kids loved it. It was their desk. And it was coloured to the way they wanted to keep their desk. Because at the school, over a third of the desks were destroyed every term. They were broken and they were cut, and old furniture would come in its place. A friend of mine, Sid, who was a great teacher at Bede's too, I'd have the kids one year and he'd have them next year. And
so you were preparing them for the Sid experience?
That's right, for Sid, because Sid was such a...
So what was Sid's family name?
Sid Neal. He became a principal at Ōtara. One of the schools, I'm not sure which one it was.
It's not a name that I...
Yeah, and he was just such a school teacher. I was a skilled motivator and a skilled let's get things done person. Sid was the educator. And so we painted all these desks, the kids all did, and they took their desks the next year. And at the end of 2 years, there wasn't one single desk that was damaged or broken. And that spoke for itself. But the problem was, about a month after we did all of this, the inspector of schools came and I got hauled over the coals for defacing school property.
You wild thing, yeah.
So I basically said to the inspector, I said, well, you didn't do your job very well. This room was an absolute mess when I came into it, so I've done it for you. I was a second year teacher.
So how did that pan out for your career as a teacher?
Well, I never knew because I left teaching a couple of years later to go to the ministry. Yeah. But the kids loved it. The kids were fantastic.
Well, it's all about the kids, isn't it?
And they were just so. I mean, they loved their room. I heard them going around at lunchtime and interval after the first week saying, "We've got the best room in the school." You know, it was like a pride. It was something that they could identify with, and it belonged to them. And that was the important thing, because you can't educate if the motivation isn't there, and you don't want to be at school. I wanted to create a room that they wanted to be in, so I could then start the work of learning. And the learning was different. I'll give you one story of what happened, because this was the time during the dawn raids. Yeah. And the dawn raids were horrendous. The school was like a tinderbox. These are 12, 13-year-old kids. They were hyped up. Their uncles, aunts and so on were being carted away. All sorts of terrible things were happening. And I remember one day walking in the classroom, and there was a group of kids sitting around, and they were having a real argument over this. You know, they were so wound up and stressed. And one of them was saying, "Oh, all the Pākehā should leave. They're the overstayers, not us." And so I went over to my desk and packed up my bag and started to walk out of the classroom. And one of the kids, "Where are you going, mister?" And I said, "Well, you just told me, all Pākehā go. I'm going back to England where I was born." "Oh, no, not you. We don't want you to go." And I said, that's interesting. Let's talk about that. And so we got into a big circle and we talked about that whole issue for the whole day. And some of the stuff coming back from the kids as they were unloading their chests and their hearts and the feelings that they had, and me sort of facilitating the conversation was just amazing. But what was funny is, as they were walking out the classroom that day, they said, "Oh, what a fantastic day, we've done no work today." And I thought, boy, you've worked harder than you've ever realised.
Creating history. So imagine if we'd had the ability to record that conversation.
Oh, it was, because what was happening was offensive. Oh. It was just appalling. And these kids, I mean, they didn't have much to look forward to as it was. Because we raised money and went on a trip to Ruatoria, Te Kaha and Rotorua.
Is that because some of the kids were from down that way?
No. I wanted them to experience something else. Some of them had never even been to the beach. They lived in Ōtara and they'd never been to the beach. There was so much life experience that they were missing out on. So I, with Lady Anne Tyndall, Stephen Tyndall's sister, and was teaching in room next to me, we combined together and we took all of these kids away on this trip. And the sad thing is that when we went on the trip, the kids were so excited. They were a bit wild to begin with when we went on the first marae and into the first church at Te Kaha and things like that. And after a while they settled down and they learned to respect the places, because they'd never been taught the protocols and how you approach and how you do things. But when we were coming down the motorway home after a week, this other motorway, you could feel the sadness in the bus. Their face, they didn't want to go home. Because a lot of them were lost. If a child never turned up to my classroom when I was teaching, I hunted them. I would go out that day and I'd go to their home and I'd be told they're at Auntie such and such stuff, so I'd go to Auntie and say, no, they're there, and I'd find them. and they knew that.
Meanwhile, you own the classroom you've left behind's gone wild.
But the thing is, after a while, the kids I'd arrive about 7:45 in the morning. The kids would be there waiting.
Yeah.
And they'd not leave till I left. It became a home, became a place for them. And it wasn't their parents' fault, because their parents were struggling so much. I mean, in the 70s here in Ōtara, the poverty level, maybe the same today, was high. And there wasn't places like this to come to. There was nothing, in fact, back then.
Yeah.
There were no charities, no food banks, there were no...
But not even a solo parent benefit until in the 70s.
Yeah.
76, wasn't it?
Yeah. And so...
Yeah.
It was
not many choices.
But the kids were lovely. I mean, they were a pain in the neck at times. I mean, teaching was hard work. I mean, they were quite lively and they'd do things that were very disruptive. But if they realised that they had hurt you, they'd come and give you a big hug. And that's the beauty of the kids, I found in Ōtara. They would do something bad, but they'd be really remorseful afterwards and give you a big hug and say sorry. And whenever I walked around the shops in Ōtara or walked around there and I'd see the kids, they'd come running up and give you a big hug. And these are kids bigger than me. I remember my wife coming in the room one day looking for me because most of the kids were taller and bigger than I was. And
you hardly,
yeah, but they
hardly a midget yourself.
But and I felt, we copped a lot of flack during those years in education, and it's happening again today. And people don't understand that if you can get the kids to school and they're at school, you've succeeded to begin with.
No, we've got
and that's
way less than 50% of kids go to school. Yeah.
Yeah, and
one day you could find up to 20 kids downstairs.
Yeah. And so the first thing you got to do is you've got to create a school environment they want to be at.
Yeah, well, we're not doing
no point in finding the parents and doing all this other silly nonsense that's going around at the moment, because the parents are poor anyway, so they're just going to make them poorer, and the kids are less likely to go to school.
So do you have a, before we leave that section, do you have... Because I'm just thinking, your stories, it's just exactly the same today, and we're trying to do exactly the same kind of intervention, make sure there's food, make sure there's warmth, make sure there's safety, make sure there's an opportunity to look over your shoulder and say, oh, that's what Ōtara looks like when you're going down the road. Because we literally do the same thing as you, but we haven't got brave enough for a noho yet, but for the last 3 or 4 years we've been hopping on a bus and going somewhere, and we've had help from various Māori strategy units in public organisations, and most recently it's the University of Auckland actually that's paying for a bus, which is amazing. But we caught, for many whānau, we were catching the bus for the first time or a train for the first time, and this includes mum. And then on the ferry, here you have a nation of seafarers, and most of the kids and their parents had never been on a ferry, never been on a boat.
No. And some of the kids, the important thing to recognise, some of these children made a real success of their lives.
Oh, yes. Well, that's what this podcast is about.
One of the boys that I taught was John Pulitahu, who Niue, and became quite a well-known Niuean artist. And he was brilliant in the school.
We know John Pulitahu.
He was brilliant in the school, in art. He was in my class, and I mean, some of his artwork and his imagination and his writing was just absolutely amazing. He had a great talent, but boy, did he have a hard life. Yeah. And I found, one day, because I ended up running the church in Clendon, which I had to start from scratch. And Clendon's very similar to Ōtara.
We've done the segue into the next one.
Yeah, it's
We're
very
off
similar.
to Clendon now.
It's very, very similar. Communities, same kids. And I remember one day I decided to do a thing to raise money for car seats for Plunket, because a lot of people were driving around with their kids not secure, and that used to concern me.
Oh, yes.
And so we as a church raised the money by doing some things. And so I contacted Plunket, and along came this woman, Plunket nurse, to see me, and who sat down and we looked at you and said, "You taught me at Beards."
Oh. That's so special, isn't it?
Yeah.
But there must be hundreds of those
And she had a 14-year-old daughter with her who looked just like she did when she was that age.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, man, you've done this with your life? I said, I said, that brings me so much joy to know that your life has been a success.
Wow. So before we spend too much time in Clendon, can you take us through that journey about your decision to leave teaching and go into the ministry, which is might be something that...
It's not something I wanted to do. I mean, you have to have a sort of a spiritual understanding to grasp what happened. I loved my teaching at Ōtara. I loved it. I threw everything into it. But I felt God calling me to be a priest. And so I had to test that. And the bishop, whether he was wise or not, I don't know, said that he wanted me to be a priest. It was Eric Going. Yeah. And so he gave me a position at St John's College, but I was in my first year at Ōtara then, and I said, no, I want to do another year before I go there. I want to finish my bond. I want to finish my teaching experience. And so I taught for another year before I went to St John's. And I remember the last day at Beard's, it was a very tearful day for me. I had grown fond of the community, fond of the school, fond of the kids.
And the family, you'd know
I believe
well.
that's something to do. And the irony of it all is that later in life, after I'd done my curacy at St Paul's and been to theatre, I ended up back in South Auckland, Clendon, starting a church from scratch with exactly the same type of community as Ōtara, predominantly Maori,
maybe that was the
Pacific
promise,
Island.
actually.
Yeah, and the same sort of kids.
Just a different hat.
Yeah, because I ended up chairing the school board of trustees. My wife taught at Roscommon School, and so we were back in the middle of it. And some of them, and some of the families in Clendon were families from Ōtara that we knew. Because it's almost like Clendon was a graduation place from Ōtara.
Well, a bit like Ōtara was a graduation point either from up north or Ponsonby if you're Pacifica. Yeah. So, joined the ministry, went to St John's, which for those of you who aren't there, it's just because I got put up with this stuff because Dad was the vicar's warden, and Mum was on the selection panel. Did you know that?
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, she was on the selection panel for St John's, and she got in big trouble because she was trying to say there was no reason why you couldn't have gay ministers, and that was probably a bit after you, but in the 80s even, and it seems unbelievable that you could be having that conversation now, but anyway. So St John's is the place where Anglican and Presbyterian
Methodist
priests are raised, and now it's raised, trained. But what is it still operating?
Yeah, it's still going.
It sold some of the land, I believe.
It's not. When I was at St John's, because it was still in that old school style, it was almost like living in a monastery in a way.
Excellent.
So
that must be fun, especially for your wife.
So it was a community, and I still believe that the community is the thrust for preparing you. Just like when we were teaching in Ōtara, we lived in the Verger's flat at St Paul's, which was a basement, and I used to have all of the down and outers
St Paul's from the city?
Yeah.
Okay.
I had all the down and outers from Grafton Bridge, but they used to sleep under Grafton Bridge those days, knocking on our door, and I'd be helping them. And
so and the repair over there as well.
And I found that what Ōtara did for me in preparing me for Clendon many years later was it helped me to appreciate and value the lives, particularly of Maori and Pacifica, and particularly also of people who were less fortunate and struggled. I mean, I get quite wound up sometimes about this issue. I did last Sunday in a sermon. I almost crossed the boundaries because
you might go back to what that looks like.
Because you've got to put yourself in other people's shoes to understand. It's like this whole business of lunches in schools. We were feeding the kids in Ōtara back in the 70s. I was born in England and did my first 2 years of schooling in London, and we always had school lunch. It was a cooked lunch. I can't see what the big deal is about. Every kid in New Zealand should get a cooked lunch at school.
I understand.
It's just silly. It's just such a silly debate and argument because school, we had a dining hall when in England, and we'd all go for lunch. And this was a state school. I wasn't flash enough to go to one of those other ones.
I can't. It feels so politically a real political minefield, and we don't need to comment on that. But it's all these sort of well-intentioned people that say, well, we had no trouble feeding our children. What's going on? Well, you know, we have 87% of people that come to our call centre will phone it or walk through the door are looking for food. So what does that say about a community? Yeah. Are they gaming it? No, they're not, because we have measures and we know if anyone would even try to sell something.
There shouldn't be any judgment in it. No. When people came to me at Clinton, because we ran a food bank and we ran all sorts of things there, I would never judge.
It takes a lot to ask for food. That's what people tell me, and I imagine it does.
And sometimes people would spin a yarn because they were embarrassed, and so they'd make up a story. And I'd often say to them, look, I haven't believed a word you said about that yarn, but I was going to give you food anyway. I said, you don't need to do that with me.
And it's good to
just say that I need it.
And I bet you didn't ask for social welfare numbers either.
No, of course not.
No.
I wouldn't
Date
have
of
a clue what
birth,
they are.
proof of identity. No. If someone comes and asks us for food, we always give them food.
But isn't that part of the heart of when I was here at Ōtara, and the same with Clinton, is that the community is a community, so people help each other anyway. And so to have agencies that are facilitating that, helping each other, is a good thing, because it's actually conducive to the nature of and the culture of the community itself.
To support the giving, manaakitanga, is what we call it, for sure. Well, it still reduces me to tears on a regular basis when you see
the other thing I thought I'd share with you, it was in Clinton, but it came out to Ōtara.
Oh, this is
the big soup.
Yes, you need to, because I think that was one of the things that made me think that we had to do a podcast, because the big soup is the best idea, and I think we need a 21st century big soup. Well, you're going to be in charge, do you know that?
It all started because there were 4 murders inside a couple of weeks in Clinton. And typically when these things happen in a community, the media comes down on it like a ton of bricks. And so there were expressions being used, South Auckland type murder. You know, the sort of language that was in the media, and I found it quite offensive.
South Auckland kills again.
Yeah, it was all that. And so I thought to myself, I need to do something that puts it in perspective and gives the community a positive feel. And I happened to be talking to this guy who loved breaking world records. It was his life thing to break world records. And so we were sitting and talking about it, and I said, let's do something ridiculous. And we came to the conclusion, let's make the world's biggest bowl of soup. And it comes out of the very famous story called the stone soup.
Maybe you tell us that story.
The stone soup, a soldier comes to a village, and he is starving hungry. And the villagers, no one comes out to help him. And so he announces a big loud voice, I've got a magic stone. And this magic stone makes the most beautiful soup in the world. But I need a pot and some water to put it in. And so someone from the village, I've got a pot, I've got some water. And so they bring a pot and water. I need some fire to heat it up. I've got some wood. And they light the fire and heat it. And the stone is in the soup, and he goes, it could do with a bit of salt. So someone said, I've got some salt at home, so they bring some salt, put it in, and there you go. Potatoes would be good in it, you know. And so it goes on, so that it ends up with potatoes, carrots, leeks, and so on. Everyone's all coming by.
And the tawny scrawny line.
Yeah, they're all putting it in the bowl for soup, and it does make a beautiful soup. The stones are relevant, of course. And people were amazed at the stone soup. And so it was that concept. And the concept grew that if I could get the community and the business community and the wider community all working together to create the world's biggest bowl of soup, which we'd distribute to everyone in the community, then that would become the focus point. Just like in that village, the bowl over the fire became the focus point. And the people were sharing without even knowing they were sharing. And so I went around all of these big companies and firms to get them on board. And people came on board. We had a problem is where do you make a 25,000 litre bowl of soup? Because to break the record, it has to be in one vat or one bowl. And the only bowl big enough in the country was at Lion Nathan Brewery. So the veggie soup, it had to be a veggie soup because Department of Health people were on me like a ton of bricks that I had to follow all of their rules, otherwise they thought I was poisoning the community or something.
Absolutely.
And so we had to do all of that. So it was a veggie soup. And Turners and Growers supplied all the veggies. Bonnie's trucks brought the soup out into the community. Lion Nathan cooked the soup. I got Birdseye, they used to make those fruit wraps. They were rolled up. They were quite good, actually.
Yes, fruit leathers or something?
They were like raspberry and apple and all sorts of fruit.
And we used to think they were good for our children.
Yeah, but every child with a veggie soup had a fruit wrap to go with it, you know. And so we got it all completed. After the soup was cooked that night and we'd broken a world record, it was then taken out into the community in Bonnie's truck. So one came out to the community centre in here, Ōtara, and gave people soup. Another one went out to Clendon. Another one went to the Manukau Event Centre. And the one in Clendon, and the same with Ōtara, I got the schools to come. So a whole school would come down, say, 10 o'clock to have their soup. And so they'd be part of the record.
So where were we serving it?
We were serving it at those three places.
In the town centres.
And I had plastic ice cream containers. I got thousands and thousands of ice cream containers free from...
reuse, sustainable.
Yeah.
And that was the bowl?
Yeah, that was the bowl of the soup that went out, but the kids had it in a cup. I got these cups from another company. There's a huge amount of stuff that's wasted in these big factories, sitting there because, like, with the ice cream containers, with I think it was Tip Top, with those, the problem was they had printed them on the plastic, and they were no longer making that brand, so they'd all be stored, all the containers, in the back of the factory somewhere. So we were doing them a favour, taking them away anyway. And
just imagine taking the time to find the resources.
Yes, it was going around all these, but I enjoyed that. It was quite a bit of fun actually, talking people into it, because they'd say, "Oh, why do you come to see me?" And I said, "Oh, I've come to invite you to be a part of the big soup." Big soup, and they'd start laughing because it sounds funny, a big soup. And then when I said we're going to make a 25,000 litre bowl of soup, people's eyes were 25,000 litres.
I know you can't wait to do it again.
Yeah, and so went out all out into the community, and I wrote a story, which is on this leaflet, which is the story, the Manukau story, the big soup. So it's
Just
like a
hold
legend.
it up so the camera gets a shot of it, mate.
So it's a legend of the big soup, and at the back of it's got the recipe if anyone wants to make it.
With the quantities?
Yeah, the quantities. If I put my glasses on, I'll be able to read it. Like the quantities, if you have it like that, there's 18,167 litres of water, 330 kilograms of vegetable stock powder, 5,000 kilograms of peeled
so our
and chopped
10
potatoes.
kilograms is nothing.
1,300 kilograms of peeled and chopped onions, 125 kilogram of salt, 25 kilogram of curry powder, 25 kilogram of turmeric, 25 kilograms of paprika, and 60 kilograms of tomato paste. And that's the recipe.
And everything was donated?
Yeah, everything.
Yeah.
And because people became part of the story. And so on the day with the containers that I put in to go out and to other parts of the community, because I took these ice cream containers full of hot soup to rest homes. I took it to the local prisons, so all the prisoners gave it. I took it to the hospitals, took it all everywhere. We could find people, even in the street, we'd drive along in a van and we'd see a whole lot of women standing on the corner waiting for some customers, I'd stop, pull over and give them some soup.
What a soup, love. It's, if you look at the parable and think about, what does that mean for a community? It's all about hope and generosity and love.
Yeah. And people were, instead of talking about the murders, they were talking about the big
hope,
soup.
And talking about hope and generosity and love and feeling those things.
And feeling they were part of a world record.
Yeah.
So it was turning something on it, because the reality of the murders, there were 4 murders, probably involved all over 20 to 30 people at the most, in a community of 10,000. It's got to be put in its specific, and this is a problem in today's world, is that if something happens in the community and it gets blown up in the media, everyone thinks that community is like that, and it's not.
Well, that's exactly the reason why we have this podcast, and that's exactly the reason why we have to tell the great stories and meet the great people.
Well, I was invited to go and speak at Katikati, not long after that, on a different topic, and when people asked me, where do you live? I said, I live in Clenton and Mapleston Drive, which was regarded as one of the roughest streets in Clenton. And they said, well, do you have to wear a stab jacket when you walk around there? And I said, no.
Just my dog collar.
I said, no, people aren't like that. But they had that perspective because of how things get blown out.
Yeah.
And it's the same with the kids. When I was teaching here, you'd get a kid who may come from quite a tough background, they may be a bit rough, bit bravado and so on, and getting into trouble. But when you dug deeply down with them, they were a lovely person. But that lovely person had to come out.
Yeah.
And what had happened is, because of all of the environment around them, that gets hidden. And so you've got to bring out the goodness of people, you've got to bring out the hope, the love, the generosity. And the kids were generous. They were funny. My first son was born while I was teaching at Ōtara, Matthew, and I'd shared with the kids that I was going to have a son born, and they got all excited about it, particularly the girls, intermediate school girls. They very motherly types, and they got all excited that Mister's going to have a baby. And so Matthew was born, and I came back the next day and I said, my son's been born. And then the following day after that, these kids came with boxes and boxes of clothes, all brand new. I don't think there was a baby clothes shop in Ōtara that hadn't been fleeced. I think they walked in and took all the clothes. But maybe one could look at it as stealing, but one could also look at it as the only way that they could actually share. And it depends on how you look at it.
But it's a generosity, isn't it?
Yeah, they wanted to do something.
And the love.
They wanted to do something
special. So Matthew was the best dressed child in the land.
In lovely Ōtara colours, bright green and pink and yellow and purple and all. It was just delightful.
It is lovely. So I'm thinking, because we can always have multiple conversations anyway, but what I'm just thinking about creating this, keeping it bite-sized, if you were to think about one thing, one gift that you could give back to Ōtara in terms of words, and you think about Clenton and Ōtara, what would you say to your class, your now year 7 class, would have been Form 1, what would you say to them if you were you then, and what would you say to them now? Now they're all grandparents, of course. So the messages for them, because people all see you and they go, oh my God, that's Mr. Beale.
Yeah, believe in the potential and possibilities of life. That there is a potential and there's a possibility there. That don't degrade yourself. And when you've done things that are maybe, because some of my kids I know we ended up in prison. There's always another chance. I've worked with the 2 most violent hitmen in the mongrel mob in Clenton, and I baptised them. And we became good friends. In fact, they did a podcast just recently which I saw, which really made me laugh because Tyra lit and it says, "Oh, that's where Father Mark lived, and he's the only little white man that I know who wasn't scared of the gangs." Which, I thought, I took that on board. I thought, oh, that's nice that you knew I wasn't. Don't. If your life has fallen apart and everything's gone wrong, that doesn't mean it has to end there. There's always a chance, there's always a potential, and find someone who can sit on the gutter next to you and talk about it and see if there's a way forward. Don't give up on yourself, and don't beat yourself because you've done some silly stuff. We've all done silly stuff. I mean, I've done silly stuff.
Just recognise the signs a bit earlier as you get older.
Yeah, I mean, I'm lucky to be alive. When I think about some of the stuff I did as a kid, going down the Manawatu River on a lilo to see what the
rapids were like.
Yeah, I mean, silly stuff like that. My mum and dad never knew about it, but I mean, but even I'm, one of the silly things I did is there were 4 of us when we were about standard 4, whatever that is nowadays. And we went into we lived on the banks of the Manawatu River, and we found this big shed, and we broke open the corrugated iron and creeped in, and in was
breaking and entering.
Yeah, and inside the shed there was Santa, who used to go on the PDC in the main town centre every Christmas. Yep. And wow, that was exciting. So we found that he had a ladder inside him, and so we crawled up in him, and I went down an arm, and his arm fell off and broke down, and oh gosh, we scattered, and then it ended up with the police coming around our place and me getting a right telling off for breaking and entering and breaking Santa.
Breaking Santa's assault.
Yeah. I mean, kids are kids, and
fearless.
Well, and life is full of ups and downs. It's full of things, but don't. I want people just to say, hey, with the right directions, I can make my life worthwhile. And the other thing I'd want to say, in terms of poverty, and I understand how hard it is. I mean, I grew up in a family of 10 in a state house. So I know what that feels like to have very little. You're not judged by what you have and what you don't have. That's not what matters. What matters is your ability to be a friend.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah.
To put your arms around someone and give someone a hug. That's who you really are, not your. I mean, my parents had nothing, and I'm in essence a refugee because we fled London in the mid-1950s because we were in poverty, and my parents wanted to start a new life in New Zealand. We had nowhere to live, and we lived in the back of an Anglican church hall. In England in the 50s, the biggest sign of poverty and disrespect was to have bare feet. And my parents used to make us wear our shoes even though they were too small, because the disgrace of having bare feet. And as soon as I went out the door, I'd take them off and walk bare feet with my mates. But that's something they had to learn about New Zealand. It was different to London.
No one's got any shoes. We'd rather not wear shoes.
Yeah, but and so it's very hard when you don't have it. But if you judge yourself on what you have or don't have, then you're misjudging.
Yeah. Take another look at that.
And again, we found that when we were teaching in Ōtara and we were trying to raise money for the trip, the kids thought if they crossed the motorway, and there was a tunnel you could cross the motorway in those days to Papatoetoe where it was wealthier, they'd get more money. But that wasn't actually the truth. The truth was actually the generosity of people in Ōtara was far better than the generosity of the people in Papatoetoe.
You can probably find that's the story today too.
And people would give anything.
Yeah.
And so it's your generosity, your kindness, your friendship. That's who makes you who you are. And You don't have to have a lot to do that.
No. Comes from the heart.
Yeah.
Costs nothing.
Yeah. And for me, I don't know what you do in your podcast, but certainly if I give you an idea what I feel with this, at the end of the story of this, and it's just a wonderful story, as the man watched the people enjoying the big manukau soup, his thought drifted to the words of the good book. I want you to be happy, always happy in the Lord. I repeat, what I want is your happiness. Let your tolerance be evident to everyone. The Lord is very near. There's no need to worry. But if there is anything that you need, pray for it. Finally, dear friends, fill your minds with everything that is true, everything that is noble, everything that is good and pure, everything that we love and honour, and everything that could be thought virtuous or worthy of praise.
Amen.
And that was the end of the story.
It's beautiful. That is beautiful, and that's exactly what we've talked about, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Beale, Mark, Father Mark, thank you. Thank you for bringing your heart back to Ōtara. Thank you for bringing your stories back and that beautiful message. Yeah. It's so important to take the gifts that we have, that are God-given gifts, and share those things, and that by that you will be assessed.
Yeah.
Thank you. We'll see you soon. I hope. Thank you, Mr. Vin.